Will do. One thing, though, the rocks seem different tonight. More of them have fresh trails than last time we were here. And the trails are deeper. Like the rocks have gotten heavier somehow. Probably just seasonal mud consistency changes. Keep monitoring. If anything seems off, pack up and return to the trailhead. Roger. At midnight, we didn't receive the check-in call. I tried reaching Rachel via satellite phone. No answer. Tried the emergency radio. Static. Tried calling her personal cell phone even though there was no service at the playa. Nothing. The standard protocol was to wait until dawn before launching a search and rescue operation for delayed researchers. But something was wrong. The wind had picked up significantly. This was no ordinary desert wind. It came from deep within the playa, as if the entire dry lakebed were breathing, and with the wind came sounds. Deep rumblings, rhythmic, like the footsteps of giant feet pounding on hardened earth. I picked up Anita, and we set off around 2 o'clock, arriving at the playa at 3:30. The researcher's vehicle was parked at the start of the trail. The camp was neatly set up at the edge of the lakebed, but there was no one there. No movement, no response to our calls. Before I tell you what really moves the sailing stones at Racetrack Playa, I need you to understand something about Death Valley. Most people think the danger is the heat, the 130-degree summers, the vast emptiness, the miles of lifeless desert. They're wrong. The real danger comes out at night, on the playa, where rocks weighing hundreds of pounds leave trails across the dry lakebed, where something walks that we can't see, and where anyone who stays after midnight doesn't come back the same way they went in. Are you watching this late at night? Maybe you're planning a Death Valley trip and want to see the mysterious moving rocks. Drop a comment and let me know. Because if you've ever stood on that flat expanse of cracked mud at sunset and felt the temperature drop 40 degrees in minutes, if you've ever heard footsteps on the playa when no one else is there, if you've ever seen the rocks move when there's no wind, you need to hear this story. What I'm about to tell you might save your life. My name is Jesse Harmon, and I've been working as a park ranger at Death Valley National Park for 6 years. I'm primarily stationed in the remote northern areas, which means I'm responsible for Racetrack Playa and the sailing stones that have puzzled scientists for decades. Over the past 6 years, I've given hundreds of presentations about these rocks, prevented dozens of people from damaging them, and led 4 search and rescue operations for visitors who got lost trying to reach a remote area. 7 months ago, I lost 3 geologists in an incident officially reported as fatal dehydration due to exposure and disorientation. But I don't think that's what happened. I know it's not. Because I found their bodies. They weren't scattered across the desert. They were under the sail rocks. They were crushed, as if something incredibly heavy had pressed down on them, as if the rocks had been used as footprints for something walking on the playa after dark. Let me start at the beginning, 7 months ago, on what should have been a routine research visit. It was late September, when Death Valley transitions from deadly summer heat to merely dangerous autumn temperatures. A team of 3 geologists from UC Davis had permits to conduct overnight observation of the sailing stones. They wanted to set up time-lapse cameras and monitoring equipment to capture the rocks moving in real time, something that had never been definitively documented with witnesses present. Dr. Rachel Mora was the lead researcher. 44 years old, 18 years studying the sailing stones, more publications on the subject than anyone else alive. If anyone understood the rocks, it was Rachel. Her team included 2 graduate students, Kevin and Yuki. All 3 were experienced desert researchers. All 3 knew the dangers of Death Valley. All 3 filed proper permits and safety plans. On September 22nd, they drove the rough dirt road to Racetrack Playa, arriving at 4 p.m. They set up camp at the edge of the playa, established their equipment grid across the dry lakebed, and prepared for nighttime observation. Standard protocol was to check in via satellite phone at 8 p.m. and again at midnight. At 8 p.m., Rachel called in. "This is Mora, camp established, equipment operational, temperature dropping as expected. We're observing some unusual wind patterns, but nothing concerning. Planning to monitor through the night." "Copy that. Weather forecast shows clear skies. No storms expected. Stay hydrated and check in at midnight." We ventured onto the playa with high-powered flashlights and night vision, and that's when we saw them. The sailing stones. Dozens of them, all positioned in a pattern that hadn't been there during the last survey. They formed a path. A trail of rocks leading from the camp deeper into the center of the playa, and beneath 3 of the largest stones, we found them. Rachel was under a 600-pound dolomite rock, Kevin under a 400-pound specimen, Yuki under a 500-pound boulder. All 3 crushed completely flat, not pushed under the rocks, not buried, crushed as if the stones had been lifted and dropped on them with tremendous force, or as if the stones had become the footsteps of something that weighed far more than rock alone could account for. The trail marks leading to each body were fresh. Deep gouges in the mud that showed the stones had moved recently, had moved directly to where each researcher had been standing, had moved with purpose and precision that didn't match any natural explanation of wind or ice skating rocks, and around each body were other marks. Not from the rocks, from something else. Impressions in the mud that looked almost like footprints. But wrong. Too large. Wrong shape. Wrong number of appendages, like something had walked across the playa using the sailing stones as stepping stones, using them to distribute its weight, using them to interact with the physical world while remaining invisible to human eyes. Search and rescue arrived at dawn, photographed everything, documented the scene, and the official investigation concluded that the researchers had been caught in a freak accident, that unusually strong winds had moved the rocks during the night, that the researchers had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, that their deaths were tragic but explainable through natural phenomena. But I'd seen the footprint marks around the bodies. I'd measured the depth of the trails. I'd calculated the force required to move those rocks and the precision with which they'd been positioned. This wasn't wind. This wasn't accident. This was something hunting, something using the sailing stones as tools or weapons or extensions of itself. I started investigating immediately. Went through every historical account of the sailing stones, every scientific paper, every ranger report, and I found a pattern that no one had officially acknowledged. Since the sailing stones were first documented in the 1940s, there had been 17 unexplained deaths at Racetrack Playa, not heat exposure, not dehydration, not getting lost. Deaths that occurred on the playa itself during nighttime hours, with the victims found crushed or broken in ways that didn't match falls or natural accidents. And in 12 of those cases, the bodies had been found near or underneath the sailing stones. The deaths were always between midnight and dawn, always during new moon periods when darkness was deepest, always with fresh rock trails leading to the victim's location, and always with those strange impressions in the mud around the scene, like something massive had walked there, something that left no clear footprints because it wasn't entirely present in our physical dimension. I found older accounts, too. Before Death Valley became a national park in 1994, before the racetrack was a known tourist destination, there were stories from the Timbisha Shoshone people who'd lived in the valley for thousands of years. They had a name for the playa. They called it Koso Mugwa, the walking ground. They said spirits walked there at night, ancient beings that predated humans, that these beings were invisible but could move stone and earth and anything they touched, that anyone who entered the walking ground after dark would be crushed beneath the feet of things that existed between worlds. White settlers had dismissed these warnings as primitive mythology, had ventured onto the playa anyway, had sometimes not returned, and now we'd built roads to it, made it accessible to tourists, turned it into a destination for photographers and geologists, and anyone who wanted to see the mysterious moving rocks. I needed to talk to someone who might understand what we were dealing with. Someone from the Timbisha Shoshone community who knew the old stories. Through park cultural liaisons, I was connected to an elder named Henry Stone, 81 years old, whose grandmother had been born in Death Valley before the park existed. We met at the Furnace Creek Visitor Center. When I explained what had happened to Rachel's team, when I described the footprint marks and the positioning of the rocks, he nodded slowly like he'd been expecting this conversation for years. "The walkers have returned," he said quietly. "My grandmother said they come in cycles. Sleep for decades, wake for years. When they wake, the playa becomes their ground, their territory, and anyone there after dark becomes part of the stones." "What are they? What are the walkers?" "Old spirits, ancient things that walked the earth before it was dry land, before the lake that made the playa existed. They're not of this world entirely, they exist between. Partly here, partly somewhere else. You can't see them, but they can see you, and they can touch the physical world when they choose. They use the stones because stones are old. Stones remember. Stones can hold their presence in ways that flesh cannot. How do we stop them? How do we protect people? You don't stop them. You respect their territory. You don't enter the playa after midnight. You don't disturb the stones. You don't camp on the walking ground. My people knew these rules for thousands of years, followed them, survived. Your people built roads and ignored warnings, and now the walkers are claiming those who trespass. Can they be communicated with, negotiated with?" He shook his head. "They don't think like humans, don't have human wants or needs. They simply exist, and when they walk, anything in their path is crushed, not from malice, just from their nature. Like how humans crush insects without noticing or caring, the walkers crush humans the same way. Is there any way to know when they're active, when they're walking? The stones tell you, when the trails are fresh, when many rocks have moved recently, when the marks are deeper than wind can explain. Those are signs the walkers are present. That's when you leave. When you don't return until daylight drives them back to wherever they rest." Over the next few weeks, I became obsessed with understanding the pattern. I analyzed every death, every sailing stone movement, every unexplained phenomenon, and I found a cycle. The walkers became active roughly every 7 years. The activity period lasted between 6 and 18 months. During those periods, the sailing stones moved frequently. The trails were deep and fresh, and people who entered the playa at night sometimes didn't return. Then the activity would stop. The walkers would go dormant, and the playa would be safe again for years. We were currently 7 months into an active cycle, which meant the walkers might remain active for another 11 months, maybe longer, and during that time, anyone on the playa after midnight was at risk. I took my findings to Maggie Kessler, the park superintendent. She was 59, 24 years at Death Valley, planning to retire the following spring. When I presented the evidence, when I showed her the pattern and the historical accounts, she looked at me with an expression that was equal parts resignation and relief. "So someone finally figured it out," she said. "What we've known but could never officially acknowledge. You know about the walkers? About what happens at night? Every superintendent since the park was established has known it's part of the unofficial briefing. The sailing stones don't move from natural causes alone. Something walks the playa. Something crushes people who are there at the wrong time. We manage the risk by discouraging nighttime visits and responding quickly to missing persons. But we can't close the area or explain the real danger without sounding insane. We could restrict access, close the playa from sunset to sunrise during active periods. On what grounds? We'd need a specific threat. Wildlife danger, geological instability, something that sounds official. Saying invisible ancient spirits crush people isn't going to fly with park administration or the public. Over the following weeks, Maggie and I worked with Dr. Paul Thornton, a geologist who'd been studying the sailing stones for 16 years, to develop a monitoring system. Paul had been documenting anomalies for years, but like Marcus at Yellowstone, he'd been unable to publish findings that contradicted accepted science. The official explanation is ice rafting, Paul told me during our first meeting. During winter, thin ice sheets form on the playa after rare rainstorms. Wind pushes the ice, which pushes the rocks, creating trails. It's elegant. It's supported by some evidence. And it's completely insufficient to explain what I've actually observed. He showed me his data time-lapse photography spanning years, seismic monitoring, weather correlation analysis, and the anomalies were obvious once you knew what to look for. The rocks move on nights with no ice, no rain, no wind strong enough to push a 600-pound boulder. They move in patterns that suggest intelligence. They converge on specific locations. They avoid certain areas entirely. And most telling, they only move between midnight and 4 a.m. during new moon periods when darkness is complete. Like something is using them, walking with them. Exactly. And there's more. He pulled up seismic data. I've been recording micro-seismic activity on the playa for 8 years. During periods when the rocks are actively moving, I detect vibrations that don't match any known source. They're rhythmic, consistent. They propagate across the playa in patterns that suggest footsteps. Massive footsteps from something that weighs thousands of pounds but doesn't leave clear impressions because it's not entirely physical. How many walkers are there? Based on the seismic patterns and rock movement analysis, I'd estimate between 3 and 7 entities active at any given time. They seem to have territories, paths they prefer. The Grandstand area in the center of the playa is a focal point. That's where the heaviest stones are, where the deepest trails form. That's where the walkers are most present. The researchers were camped near Grandstand. That's where we found them. They were in the worst possible location, right in the center of walker territory during an active cycle. He looked at me seriously. Jesse, I've been documenting this for years, but could never speak publicly. Now that you know, now that the Park Service is acknowledging internally that something unexplained is happening, we might be able to implement real safety protocols. We developed a warning system based on Paul's seismic monitoring. When the sensors detected the characteristic vibrations that indicated walker presence, we would implement emergency closures of the playa access road. The official reason would rotate between wildlife activity, road maintenance, and geological monitoring. Anything that kept people away without mentioning invisible entities. The system went into effect in early November, and for 6 weeks it worked perfectly. We identified 9 high-risk nights and successfully prevented anyone from reaching the playa during those periods. Each morning after a high-risk night, we'd find fresh stone trails, deep gouges showing recent movement, patterns that suggested multiple walkers had been active but no people present. No victims, no incidents. Then came December 18th, a night that would prove the walkers were not only active but becoming bolder, more aggressive, more aware of human presence even outside the playa. Paul's sensors triggered at 11 p.m., showing massive seismic activity. Multiple walkers, high intensity. We immediately closed the access road and sent rangers to enforce the closure. But at midnight, we received a distress call from Tea Kettle Junction, a landmark 3 miles from Racetrack Playa, where visitors left kettles and teapots as an informal tradition. A couple in their 50s had been camping there, had ignored our road closure, had driven around the barriers, and now they were calling for help because something was circling their campsite, something they couldn't see but could hear. Massive footsteps, ground shaking, and their vehicle was being damaged, not by wind or animals, by something pressing down on it, crushing it. Anita and I responded immediately. Arrived at Tea Kettle Junction at 12:40 a.m. The couple's SUV was destroyed. Roof collapsed. Doors bent inward, like something enormously heavy had stepped on it repeatedly. The couple was hiding behind a boulder 50 yards away, terrified but physically unharmed. "It's still here," the man whispered when we reached them. "We can't see it, but we can hear it, walking around, looking for us." And he was right, I could hear it too. Footsteps on gravel. Slow, deliberate, heavy enough to make the ground vibrate. But when I shined my flashlight in the direction of the sounds, there was nothing visible. Just empty desert. And the sailing stones scattered across the landscape like they'd been kicked aside by something passing through. "We need to get to our vehicle," I said quietly. "Move slowly. Don't run. Stay close." We started toward our Ranger truck, but the footsteps changed direction, started following us, getting closer, and the air grew cold despite Death Valley's mild winter night. Cold, like something was displacing heat, absorbing warmth from the environment. Anita grabbed my arm. "Jesse, look at the ground." Impressions were appearing in the dirt, right in front of us, forming as we watched. Not quite footprints, more like pressure marks. Oval shapes 8 feet long and 4 feet wide. Too large to be human, too deep to be anything natural. And they were appearing in a line, moving toward us. Whatever was making them was invisible but getting closer with each step. "Back to the boulder. Now." We retreated. The couple was crying. The impressions kept forming, kept advancing. And then one appeared directly on a sailing stone that lay between us and the approaching walker. The stone cracked, split in half under the pressure. 700 pounds of rock shattered like it weighed nothing. "They've never come this far from the playa before," Anita said. "Never left their territory. Why now?" "Maybe they're expanding. Maybe the cycle is intensifying. Maybe there are more of them." I grabbed my radio. "Dispatch, this is Harmon. We have an active walker manifestation at Tea Kettle Junction, 3 miles outside normal range. 1 vehicle destroyed, 4 people trapped. Requesting immediate backup and evacuation support." "Copy. Backup en route. ETA 30 minutes. 30 minutes. We had to survive 30 minutes with an invisible entity circling us. An entity that could crush rock and metal, that could sense our presence even when we couldn't see it. That was actively hunting us. The impressions continued to appear, circling our position. The walker was studying us, deciding what to do. And then I remembered what Henry Stone had said. The walkers use stones because stones remember, stones can hold their presence. "The sailing stones," I said to Anita. "Throw them, away from us. Give it something else to interact with." We started grabbing smaller sailing stones and throwing them as far as we could in different directions. And it worked. The impressions changed direction, started following the thrown stones. Like the walker was drawn to them. Like it preferred the stones to humans. Or like it was confused by the multiple stone positions and couldn't decide which to pursue. We kept throwing, kept redirecting the walker's attention, and slowly the impressions moved further away. The footsteps grew fainter. The entity was leaving, or at least moving to a different area of its territory. Backup arrived 23 minutes later. 3 Ranger vehicles. We evacuated the couple, and their destroyed SUV was left for daytime recovery. By dawn, The walker was gone. The impressions remained in the dirt. The cracked sailing stone lay in pieces, and we had confirmation that the walkers weren't confined to the playa anymore. They were expanding their range, becoming more active, more aggressive. Over the next month, we had 4 more incidents of walker activity outside the playa. A photographer at Ubahibe Crater reported his camera being crushed by invisible force. A hiker on the trail to Telescope Peak heard massive footsteps and found fresh impressions in the trail behind him. 2 campers near the Grandstand rock formation abandoned their tent when something began circling them at 2 a.m. Each incident followed the same pattern between midnight and dawn. New moon periods, invisible presence, pressure impressions in the ground, sailing stones involved in some way. The walkers were no longer content to remain on the playa. They were patrolling larger areas, claiming more territory. Paul's seismic data confirmed it. The vibrations are spreading. I'm detecting walker signatures up to 5 miles from Racetrack Playa. Now, they're not just walking the dry lakebed anymore. They're walking the entire northern section of the park, and there are more of them. I'm counting at least 12 distinct seismic signatures, maybe more. Why are they expanding? What's changed? I don't know. Maybe it's a natural part of their cycle. Maybe they're responding to increased human presence. Maybe they're preparing for something. But at this rate, within 6 months, they'll have claimed 50 square miles. We won't be able to keep people safe just by closing the Playa Road. We'll need to close entire sections of the park. That won't happen. Park administration won't authorize closures that large without proof of specific danger. Then, people are going to die. Not just researchers who ignore warnings. Regular tourists, families, anyone who happens to be camping in the wrong place at the wrong time when a walker passes through. He was right. And 3 weeks later, his prediction came true in the most horrible way possible. A family of 5 from Oregon had been camping at a designated site 10 miles from Racetrack Playa standard camping. Proper permits, nothing that should have put them at risk. On the night of January 28th, they called emergency services at 1:15 a.m., reporting that their campsite was being destroyed, that something invisible was tearing through their tents, that the children were screaming. Rangers responded, but arrived too late. The family's vehicle was crushed, their camping gear scattered across a 100-yard radius. And the parents were dead. Not the children, just the parents, found with massive crushing injuries, like something had stepped on them while pursuing them across the desert. The 3 children survived, 9, 12, and 14 years old, traumatized. Describing something they couldn't see but could feel. Something that made the ground shake. Something that had killed their parents while chasing the family across the desert. The incident made national news. Demands for park closures, investigations into safety protocols, and conspiracy theories about what really happened. Some people claimed it was a rare earthquake. Others said military testing from nearby bases. A few mentioned the sailing stones and suggested connection to the mysterious rock movements. But no one officially acknowledged the truth. That ancient entities walk Death Valley at night. That they've expanded their territory beyond the playa. That anyone camping in the northern sections of the park after midnight is at risk of being crushed by things that exist between dimensions. Maggie made the decision to implement extensive nighttime closures. The official reason was increased seismic activity requiring public safety restrictions. All camping in a 30-mile radius of Racetrack Playa was suspended indefinitely. Road access was limited to daylight hours only. Rangers patrolled to enforce the closures. It helped. The next 2 months, we had 0 fatalities. A few close calls with people who ignored closures. A few more destroyed vehicles. But no deaths. The walkers continued their expansion, but with fewer humans present, they had fewer opportunities to claim victims. And then Paul detected something new in his seismic data. something that made even his scientific objectivity crack into fear. "Jesse, you need to see this. The walker signatures are changing. They're getting stronger, more defined, like they're becoming more physical, more present in our dimension. And there's something else. They're converging, all 12 of them, moving toward a single location." "Where?" "Racetrack Playa. The Grandstand specifically, they're gathering there. Every night for the past week, like they're preparing for something, or waiting for something." "What happens if they all manifest at once? If they all become fully physical?" "I don't know, but based on the seismic intensity, if they all become as solid as the impressions suggest they can be, they could reshape the entire playa, could create earthquakes, could make the area uninhabitable for humans permanently." We had to see it for ourselves, had to witness what the walkers were doing at Grandstand, had to understand what was coming. So on the night of February 14th, Paul, Anita, and I drove to Racetrack Playa under the cover of official research. Arrived at 11 p.m. Positioned ourselves on the high ground overlooking the playa with night vision equipment and seismic sensors. At midnight exactly, they appeared, not visually, but through the effects they created. 12 sets of impressions forming simultaneously across the playa, all moving toward Grandstand, all converging on the massive rock outcrop that sat in the middle of the dry lakebed like an island. And the sailing stones began to move, all of them. Dozens of rocks sliding across the mud, not pushed by wind, pulled by something, arranged into patterns, into shapes, into what looked almost like symbols or letters in a language that predated humanity. "They're communicating," Paul whispered, "using the stones to leave messages, or to mark territory, or to prepare something." The impressions reached Grandstand, circled the rock formation. And then something changed. The air grew cold. Visibility dropped as fog formed despite the dry climate. And through the fog, through our night vision equipment, we saw them. Not clearly, not completely, but enough. Shapes that were almost corporeal. Massive forms that stood 20 feet tall. Bodies that seemed to be made of darkness and stone and something that shifted between solid and transparent. They didn't have faces, didn't have features we could recognize. Just mass, presence, weight. They were gathering, performing something, a ritual maybe, or simply existing in greater density than usual. And as they stood there, the playa began to change. The mud cracked in perfect geometric patterns. The sailing stones lifted slightly off the ground, and the seismic readings went off the scale. "We need to leave," Anita said. "Now. Whatever they're doing, we shouldn't be here for it." We retreated, drove away from the playa as fast as the rough road would allow. Behind us, through the rearview mirror, I saw light. Not firelight or electric light. Something else. A blue-white glow emanating from Grandstand. Like the walkers were creating something, opening something, bringing something through from wherever they existed into our world. The morning after witnessing the gathering at Grandstand, Paul's equipment showed something that terrified us all. The seismic signature had fundamentally changed. The rhythmic footstep patterns were still there, but now they were accompanied by a sustained low-frequency vibration, like a heartbeat, like something enormous was breathing beneath the playa. "This is new," Paul said, his hands shaking as he showed me the data. "In 16 years of monitoring, I've never seen this. It's like the walkers aren't just walking anymore. They're anchored, connected to something beneath the surface. Something that's waking up. What's beneath the playa? What could they be connected to?" Racetrack Playa is a dry lakebed. Beneath it are layers of sediment going back millions of years. Below that is bedrock. Below that, he pulled up geological surveys. There's an anomaly, a void space at approximately 2,000 feet depth. We always assumed it was a natural cave system or ancient lava tube. But now I'm wondering if it's something else, if the walkers don't just walk on the surface, if they come from below, if that void is where they originate or where they return when they're dormant. Can we explore it? Send down equipment to see what's there? Not without drilling. And drilling would require federal permits, environmental studies, months of bureaucracy. By the time we got approval, the active cycle might be over, or worse, we might trigger something by disturbing their source. Over the next week, the phenomenon intensified. Every night between midnight and 4 a.m., the walkers gathered at Grandstand. Every night, the blue-white glow grew brighter. Every night, more sailing stones were moved into elaborate patterns that covered acres of the playa, and every night, the seismic readings showed that sustained vibration growing stronger. Then, on February 21st, Henry Stone called me. "You need to see something. Something my grandmother left. Instructions for if the walkers ever began the awakening ritual." I drove to meet him at his home in Death Valley Junction. He led me to a storage room filled with items from his grandmother's life. Baskets, tools, and a leather-bound journal written in a mixture of English and Timbisha Shoshone. "My grandmother documented the last awakening," Henry explained. "It happened in 1952, before the park existed. Before many people came to this area, she was 19 years old. She witnessed it with her father, who was a spiritual leader for our people. He showed me pages filled with drawings and descriptions. The walkers gathering at the playa, stones arranged in patterns, a blue-white light and something emerging, something that the text called the Old Walker. The first one, the largest one, the entity that all the others served or were connected to. When the Old Walker rises, it claims the surface for a time. Everything within 10 miles becomes walking ground. Nothing survives there. Not animals, not plants, not humans. The land becomes theirs completely. My grandmother's people had to evacuate, had to leave Death Valley for 6 months until the Old Walker returned to sleep. How did they make it go back to sleep? They didn't. It simply returned on its own when it was finished, when it had walked the boundaries of its territory. When it had marked the land as claimed, then it went back down, and the smaller walkers went dormant for 7 years before becoming active again. That was 73 years ago, if the cycle is roughly every 7 years. Then this is the 11th cycle since the last awakening. And every 11th cycle, the Old Walker rises. My grandmother wrote that clearly. Every 11th cycle, prepare for the awakening. Evacuate the valley. Let them have their territory. I took photos of the journal and rushed back to show Maggie and Paul. When they saw the documentation, when they understood what was about to happen, the color drained from their faces. "We need to evacuate the northern section of the park," Maggie said immediately. "Close everything within 20 miles of Racetrack Playa. Issue emergency orders. Blame it on seismic activity or whatever we have to. But we need people out of that area before this Old Walker manifests." That's 100 square miles, multiple campgrounds, major roads. We'd need to evacuate thousands of visitors and close facilities worth millions in revenue. The Park Service will never authorize it without proof of specific danger. Then we need to give them proof. Show them the seismic readings. Show them the historical documentation. Show them the bodies we've recovered. Make them understand this isn't a normal situation. For the next 48 hours, we fought bureaucratic battles, presented data, made urgent calls to regional directors and Department of Interior officials, showed them everything except the explicit truth that invisible ancient entities were about to claim 100 square miles of Death Valley, and finally, reluctantly, they authorized a limited evacuation. All camping within 15 miles of Racetrack Playa was closed. Road access was restricted to daylight hours only. Visitors were warned of unusual seismic activity and potential ground instability. It wasn't the full 20-mile radius Henry had recommended, but it was something. The closures went into effect on February 25th. We spent 3 days evacuating campers, closing facilities, and posting rangers at every access point to enforce the restrictions. Most people complied. Grumbled, but left. Understanding that when rangers say there's danger, you listen. But not everyone left. On the night of February 28th, our remote cameras detected a vehicle driving toward Racetrack Playa at 11 p.m. 2 people, ignoring the closed road, bypassing the barriers, heading directly toward where the walkers gathered every night. Anita and I responded immediately. But they had a 15-minute head start and the rough road slowed us down. By the time we reached the Playa overlook, it was 11:45 p.m. 15 minutes until midnight. 15 minutes until the walkers would appear. The vehicle, a modified Jeep, was parked at the trailhead. 2 men in their 30s were already on the playa, walking toward Grandstand with camera equipment. Live streamers, probably, or paranormal investigators. People who'd heard about the mysterious activity and decided to document it for their channels despite the closures. "This is Park Service! You're in a closed area. Return to your vehicle immediately," I shouted through the megaphone. They turned and waved, didn't come back, just kept walking toward Grandstand, toward where 12 walkers gathered every night at midnight, toward where something old was preparing to rise. "We have to get them off the playa before midnight," Anita said. "If they're there when the walkers appear, they're dead." We ran on to the playa, our boots crunching on the dried mud. The men were 200 yards ahead, still walking casually toward Grandstand like they had all the time in the world. Behind us, I could hear the engine of our truck still running, providing the only sound in the vast silence of Death Valley at night. "Stop! You don't understand the danger!" I was shouting now, running as fast as I could across the uneven surface. They stopped, turned around, and I could see their faces in the beam of my flashlight, young, confident, excited. They thought this was an adventure, thought the closure was just rangers being overcautious, thought they'd get great footage for their channel and maybe some validation that the sailing stones really did move mysteriously. "Dude, we're just shooting some content," one of them yelled back. "We'll be gone in an hour." "You need to leave now. In 10 minutes, this entire area becomes—" I didn't finish the sentence because at that moment, at 11:58 p.m., 2 minutes early, the temperature dropped 30 degrees in seconds. My breath became visible. Frost began forming on the dried mud. And I heard it. Footsteps. Massive footsteps. Not the rhythmic pattern we'd heard before. Something heavier, slower, more deliberate, coming from beneath the playa, from deep underground, rising toward the surface. "Run," I said quietly. Then louder, "Run!" The live streamers finally understood, started sprinting back toward their vehicle, but it was too late. The surface of the playa began to crack, not in the geometric patterns we'd seen before, in one massive circular fracture around Grandstand, 100 yards in diameter, and the circle started to sink. The ground beneath us lurched. I grabbed Anita, and we stumbled, nearly falling. The live streamers went down hard, one of them screaming as his ankle twisted, and through the widening cracks in the playa surface, light emerged. That blue-white glow, but so much brighter, so much more intense, and then it rose. The old walker. Not invisible like the others, fully manifest, fully physical. Visible in horrible detail. It was enormous. 50 feet tall at least, shaped like a humanoid, but wrong in every detail. Its body seemed to be made of stone and darkness and something that moved like living shadow. It had too many limbs, too many joints. A head that was elongated and eyeless, but somehow still seeing. And where it stood, where its massive feet pressed into the playa, the sailing stones shattered beneath the weight. 700-pound boulders crumbled like dried mud. The 12 smaller walkers appeared around it, circling, attending, like servants or children or extensions of the old walker's presence, and together they began to move, to walk, spreading out across the playa in a coordinated pattern that was marking territory, claiming the surface. "Get the live streamers!" Anita was pulling me toward where the 2 men had fallen. One was trying to get up, his camera still recording. The other was crawling, his ankle too injured to walk. We reached them just as one of the smaller walkers turned in our direction, started flowing across the playa toward us, not at full speed, almost leisurely, like it knew we couldn't escape, like it was playing with prey. I grabbed the injured man and hauled him up, half carrying him. Anita had the other one. We ran. Not toward our truck. That was too far. Toward the Jeep the live streamers had driven. Toward the only escape that might be close enough. The walker was faster. The impressions of its footsteps appeared behind us, gaining ground. I could feel the cold radiating from it. Could hear the sound of stones shattering as it walked over them. Could sense its presence like pressure on my back. "The Jeep! Get in the Jeep!" We were 50 yards away. 40. 30. The walker was 10 yards behind us. I could see its impression forming in my peripheral vision. Could feel it reaching out with appendages that existed half in our dimension and half in whatever space it came from, 20 yards to the Jeep. 15. 10. The walker's shadow fell across us. Not a natural shadow. Something that moved independently of light. Something that touched my shoulder and burned with cold. Something that was about to crush us like it had crushed Rachel Mora and her team 7 months ago. And then we heard it. A sound like thunder, like massive drums, coming from the direction of the playa entrance. Headlights appeared, dozens of them vehicles racing toward us across the desert. And between the vehicles, people running. Native American people in traditional dress, carrying torches and singing in a language that predated English in North America. Henry Stone had brought his tribe, had brought everyone who knew the old ceremonies, had brought fire and song and ancient knowledge to confront the walkers on their own ground. The walker behind us stopped, turned toward the approaching crowd, and I felt its attention shift, felt its focus move from us to the greater threat. The people who knew what it was, who remembered, who had survived its awakenings before. "Go!" Henry's voice carried across the playa. "Get them out! We'll hold the walkers here." We reached the Jeep, threw the live streamers into the back. Anita got in the driver's seat and I dove into the passenger side. The engine was still running, keys in the ignition. She floored it, tires spinning in the dried mud before gaining traction. As we raced away, I looked back, saw the Timbisha Shoshone people forming a circle around the walkers, saw them performing rituals that had been passed down for thousands of years, saw the old walker stop its advance, not retreating, but not pursuing either. Observing, listening, remembering. Maybe that these people had always shown respect, had always acknowledged its presence, had always honored the boundary between the walking ground and the human world. The ceremony lasted until dawn. We watched from the safe distance of the playa entrance, watched as the Timbisha people sang and danced and made offerings, watched as the old walker gradually sank back into the ground, taking the blue-white light with it, watched as the 12 smaller walkers dispersed, their impressions growing fainter until they vanished completely. By sunrise, the playa was empty again. The cracks had sealed. The shattered stones remained, but the walkers were gone, returned to wherever they existed between surface and depth, between presence and absence, between our world and something older. Henry approached us as his people were packing up. He looked exhausted, aged by the night's events, but satisfied. "The old walker has marked its territory," he said. "For the next 6 months it will rest. The smaller walkers will remain active but less aggressive, and then the cycle will enter dormancy again. 7 years of quiet before it begins again." "How did you stop it? How did your ceremony work?" "We didn't stop it. We reminded it. Reminded it that some humans still remember, still respect, still honor the old agreements our ancestors made. That we will not build permanent structures on the walking ground, will not disturb the stones, will not claim what belongs to them. In return, they will not expand beyond their territory, will not hunt humans actively, will only claim those who trespass willfully after being warned. Will it come back in 7 years? The cycle continues. It has for thousands of years. It will for thousands more. But now you know. Now your people know. Now you can teach the next rangers, the next park administrators, the next generation who will need to manage this place when the walkers wake again. The live streamers survived traumatized but alive. Their footage was confiscated as evidence in the ongoing investigation. They claimed they'd seen something impossible, something that science couldn't explain, and they were dismissed as stressed and disoriented, as people who'd panicked in a dangerous situation and created false memories to explain their fear. But we knew the truth. And more importantly, we had documentation now. Video evidence, seismic recordings, tribal testimony. Everything we needed to make future park administrations take the threat seriously, to ensure that when the next cycle came, when the walkers woke again in 7 years, we'd be prepared. Maggie implemented permanent protocols. The Racetrack Playa area would be closed from midnight to 6 a.m. year-round. During active cycles, which would be identified by Paul's seismic monitoring, the closure would expand to a 15-mile radius. Camping would be prohibited during high-risk periods. And most importantly, the park would work with the Timbisha Shoshone tribe to maintain the ancient agreements to ensure respect for the walking ground, to honor what had been there long before the park existed. I continued working at Death Valley, became the unofficial keeper of walker knowledge-trained new rangers on the real dangers of Racetrack Playa, coordinated with Paul and Henry to monitor the cycles and predict active periods. And every midnight, when I was on duty in the northern sections, I listened for footsteps, watched for impressions in the ground, made sure no one was on the playa after dark. The walkers are still there, still walking their territory during the hours when darkness is deepest, still using the sailing stones as tools and markers and extensions of their presence, still claiming anyone foolish enough to ignore the warnings and enter the walking ground after midnight. But now we know what they are, know when they're active, know how to coexist with them, not through confrontation or control, but through respect and acknowledgement, through honoring the boundaries that the indigenous peoples maintained for thousands of years before we arrived with our roads and our visitor centers and our assumption that every place on Earth could be made safe for tourism. If you visit Death Valley, if you want to see the mysterious sailing stones, I'm not going to tell you not to go. It's spectacular. It's geological mystery. It's one of the most unique places on Earth. But follow the closure hours. Don't enter the playa after midnight. Don't disturb the stones. Don't ignore ranger warnings. And if you hear footsteps when no one else is there, if you see impressions forming in the ground, if you feel the temperature drop and the air grow heavy with presence, leave immediately. Because we don't enter the Racetrack Playa after midnight. Not because of park rules, not because of liability concerns, but because that's when the walkers claim their territory. That's when something ancient and massive walks the desert. That's when the sailing stones become footsteps for entities that exist between worlds. And if you're there when they walk, you'll learn what Rachel and her team learned, what the 17 victims before them learned, what every person who's ignored the warnings has learned too late. The stones don't move themselves. They're moved by something we can barely perceive, something that's been here for millions of years, something that will be here for millions more after we're gone. The walkers are patient. The walkers are vast. And the walkers will crush anything that stands in their path when they walk their territory at night. We just try to make sure no one is standing there when they do.